Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, share this video with a friend, leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. And if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to subscribe there and leave a 5-star review. My guest today is a playwright and director based in Kinston, Ontario. He's written a number of plays for young people, including Pretty Pieces, Ghost of the Tree, and Till the Boys Come Home. His recent play, Josiah Henson, From Slave to Savior, starring Cassel Miles, has been touring across Canada and the U.S. He also formerly ran Bottle Tree Productions with his partner, Anne-Marie Mortensen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Charles Robertson.
Hey, James.
Hey, Charles, let's try this again. We sat down and did an interview a couple weeks ago, and I had some sound issues on my end, and my audio was choppy. So let's start with Josiah Henson again. This is a one-person show.
Yep.
But like most one-person shows, usually they're vanity projects written by somebody who's usually gone through some kind of tribulation, trauma that they got to share, and they but this one's not. This is one actually nonfiction, and you didn't write it for yourself. You wrote it for somebody else.
Yep.
So can we talk about that process, especially because I think you said 31 characters?
Yes.
So how do you write a play for 31 characters for one person?
Well, I'll start a little bit before that.
Sure.
So I was the AD at Bottle Tree Productions, and Cassel Miles, who used to be a musical stage actor, was doing a show for our company. And he didn't know who I was because I was always sitting in the background and not taking part in the show that we were doing at the time. But anyways, we got to talking, and he said he had this idea for a show that he wanted to do about Josiah Henson, and he'd been trying to get it done for 14 years, and nobody would take him up on it. So I said, well, I'll read his autobiography. And I read it, and I thought, this is a great story. And I knew Cassel was a song and dance guy. So I was thinking that his talents, I could bend his talents to the best use of the play. My advantage over other playwrights tends to be that I work with the actors because I'm a director too. Sure. So I will shape shows around a talented actor. So he can sing, he can dance, and he can act. And he was nominated for a Dora Award, which is Toronto's best award for Angels in America when it opened in Canada. So wow. He's very talented. But he's used to musicals where the sets drop in and out and there's like 900 people on stage. So I said, so this is going to be a one-person show. He goes, what? I said, you got no props. He goes, what? And you got a bucket. That's all. Just a bucket on stage. And I'm going to limit you to a 12 by 12 area. So the directing and the writing helps because I can direct them in a way I want to, and I can change the script to take advantage of his strengths. I always think it's good to work in collaboration with your actors. I mean, in Shakespeare's time, he had a company of the same company. And so the clowns would have their shtick, so he'd write for them. And then Burbage was the leading man, so he'd write stuff for them. And if you like, I was brought up in a theater family, so I've done so much in theater that I think I have an advantage other playwrights don't have. And I would advise anybody who's going into playwriting to get involved in amateur theater, community theater, whatever, as a start. Because then if it's not so good, you don't care. You can go on to the next one. But I was sort of under a microscope for a while because I was in a theater family. So I had to prove myself all the time. So there's a little bit of anxiety. But
sure, fair enough.
Yeah. I found out I was a terrible actor. So writing became the thing. So with Cassel, it took us about 2 years before he got into the swing of things, of what I wanted, because he's a dance guy. Mm-hmm. And dancers are told what to do. And in theater, you want to know what that person has to give you. So we we ended up communicating through superheroes because he's a big Marvel fan. So I'd say, well, you know, like when Iron Man does this, or Steve Rogers, Captain America, does this, and that's how we started communicating. And I think it's really neat because we communicated on the most basic grassroots level. It wasn't like, so where did you study theater? And, you know, what's your method? What's your this? So it was just basically very simple parts that we put into this show. And we had a very simple way of communicating, which worked really well. I mean, people obviously sometimes think that playwrights and directors sit there and have highbrow conversations. We had very lowbrow conversations to get our show up on the road. And so when we have a film of it, like we've streamed it. We were in Theater Orangeville, and we sent it down to New York with to the Crane Theater, and the guy thought that was great. Aris, he's the AD there, and he said, well, he'd be proud to do the show there. So we're going there for Juneteenth. Okay. And I know I kind of ran over your whole question there.
No, that's okay. So let's get back to that then in that aspect. So you're writing a one-person play. You've got 31 characters. Do they interact with one another?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So
there's a magic word.
Yeah. Well, outside of that, because that's the one thing it's another approach directing wise, but I want to go from the playwriting perspective in this regard and how you approach that. And if you're, you know, sometimes some pieces when they're one person show, you're not interacting with anybody. They're just kind of telling the story, or maybe there are some other characters. But so how do you, I mean, do you write that as if it was a multicast play? Is that how you approach it? Or did you approach it differently, knowing who you were writing it for?
Right. That's a good point. I wrote it as the big word for me in this show was transitions. So because Cassel could move really well and dance, I wanted the characters to shapeshift into another one. Mm-hmm. And I would write different rhythms and different styles for each character, and different word usage and all that kind of stuff. So it was like writing for a big cast, except I'd also take advantage of what Cassel could do. So I wouldn't do, like, he has this thing where this white overseer's beating Josiah with a stake from the fence, and this other slave runs into the middle of the beating and tells the guy to stop. And Cassel moves so beautifully that people really think there's more characters than there are. So that helped me with my playwriting, knowing that he could switch so well. And so I based my writing on that. So, okay, we need a small character here because there's a lot of lines and this guy just pops in. So he has one line, but so he gets to be the star of the show for this second. And Cassel puts his all into every single character, no matter how small, no matter how big. So the script's been altered as we go along. We're doing it in schools right now in the Ontario area. And it's like a dry run where we engage the audience in talkbacks and say, what do you think of it? How could it be better? I always think the audience is a good thing for a playwright, so they can judge, do your lines stink? Do I cringe when I hear them? Is it good? And I used to be a harsh, like, very defensive as a writer, but now I don't care. Like, I just want it to be good.
Do you take what works and then just kind of throw away what doesn't when it comes to that advice? And do you do that only if it's something that, like, let's say if you didn't agree with it at first, maybe you heard it from one person, like, no, I just, that's wrong. I don't agree with you. But then maybe you've heard it 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
And maybe it's time to take a step back and consider that. Okay. So,
but I just want to say one thing, James,
sure,
is that as a writer, you have to have your conviction, you know, like, because everybody's going to have criticism for what you're doing. So you got to figure out what's the important things and what's not. So you've got to, like, you're being buffeted on both sides. This is wonderful. This stinks, blah, blah, blah. So you can't take praise too much to heart, and you can't take criticism too much to heart.
Sure, absolutely. And sometimes I think, to give or take who we're hearing that praise from, sometimes
exactly.
if your friends, they may not be giving you the true criticism that they might feel, which I think that's probably important when it comes to playwrights, that to really find people that will be open and honest with them in order to improve. I think we all need that.
Yeah.
So if with this one, this is kind of written for Cassel.
Yeah.
Is this a play that once you guys really have it nailed down, for lack of a better word, when everything's fleshed out and you've got the piece exactly how you want it to be, is this a play that you'll publish?
Yes.
And for other actors to tackle?
Yes. What I want to do too right now is, we haven't got there yet, but I want to have a female Black singer as an accompanist to the show, because I think that would add so much depth to the program. And I think, a very talented singer would add to the emotional stuff and the poignancy and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I want to ultimately get to. And we're not there yet, but that's where I want to go.
You said you're going to a theater in New York, you said, correct?
Yes.
And you sent this story to the script that you've got?
Yes, we sent it by video. So the guy looked at the video, Eras did, and he it's the script. Like, the issue with my scripts is people can read them and not get it. It has to be performed before people can get it. So I didn't want to send the script to anybody. Sorry. I didn't want to send the script to anybody because I know they'd look at it and they wouldn't know all the actions that are taking place in it. So they couldn't figure out. I think I was talking to you before. That was like Miracle Worker, which when I read the script, it wasn't much, but when I got it up on stage, it was awesome because there were all these other things going on. That's why you're supposed to read stage directions, I guess.
Because obviously right now you may not have many stage directions in this iteration. So is that obviously that's something you'll add, or will you just let people kind of take it by the horns?
I want Cassel to put the dance moves in because he does a lot of tap and stuff. So that has to be in there so people know what's going on. And we have to add directions, and we've got to come up with a solid script that we're going to use over and over again. So Hal Holbrook worked for 17 years on Mark Twain before he got it finished.
Oh, wow. When you mentioned you're a minimalist, and when it comes to your directing, does that apply to your playwriting as well? Do you try to? Yes.
I have written plays that are more, Till the Boys Come Home has a lot of, like, it has a big musical number, it has a big battle number, and it has like 11 actors in it. But when I'm doing smaller cast plays, I just, like, if you're doing touring for a one act or something, you have to have a little set. You don't want to be changing sets or anything like that because it soaks up time. So I learned for one acts to be very minimalist, and for one person shows. I've done 3 of them, one person shows so far, and they've all done really well. So I think primarily because of the imagination of the actor. So whatever the actor sees, the audience sees. So I always liken it to being a magician. A one-person show is like a magician, and he can make the audience think anything. Sure. So that's what I do.
What was your biggest struggle starting out when you first started writing?
Well, I could always write, but I wasn't confident about putting it in front of others.
Okay.
So, and I was too sensitive to criticism. So,
what made you change?
Well, if you do it enough, and people like it. I had to go through different iterations though, because I was writing school shows when I was younger and fairy tales, and they did really, really well. I think like 100,000 kids saw one of my shows in like through Ontario. So I went through iterations because I was working with my parents' company. So I was a resident writer in that. And then I decided to break, like I thought, well, this is diminishing returns. I wrote some history plays, but it was diminishing returns because I wasn't exploring the deeper things in my life and that. So I started writing pretty pieces, Ghost of the Tree and this show. I wrote a one-person show called The Hack about a cab driver. And I knew a cab driver who had a tumultuous career. And so it was a great show, and he was great, but he was from the streets, like, and he was a great actor, and it went really well. So I kind of shifted from what I had been doing, and I kind of broke that mold, and this is much more fun.
Did that actually take place in a cab, that play?
Part of it. It was a one-person show. So it was his crummy apartment, a bar, and in the cab. So
how did you stage that? You know, I go back and forth. I mean, it just always seems like a car it seems like a common location, you know, but it's, you know, because it's a stage, then I always think that maybe it should be something avoided. But how do you approach that as a director?
I mean, we had so many, like it was just a chair for the cab. Okay. So it wasn't anything. It was just very minimal. And it was very light because we didn't change the set or anything. So, and the cab was like a vehicle for life. It was a metaphor for, he wanted to be a writer and go to Hollywood, but the cab was taking him, you know, down.
Sure.
So, and like the people that would come into the cab were all like visions of hell. Like they were normal people. It was written realistically, but it was like all the negative things in his head were keeping him driving downwards while he wanted to get, you know, famous and rich. I guess that was kind of like me. But
are there things you still struggle with as a playwright? Or do you feel like you've pretty much overcome everything?
No, I don't think anybody ever does, but it's hard for me. Like I've written play, like if you do community theater and you have a big cast play, you've got to be able to have stuff that everybody can do. So, and I've written some plays that everybody can do, you know, they don't have to be great actors to do it. But I like writing shows that are more complicated and difficult, and the actor really has to stretch to be able to do it. That's just my thing.
Can you give me an example?
Well, for instance, Till the Boys Come Home is a good story, and it's a good play, but it doesn't need, I was conscious of the actors, so it doesn't need virtuoso performances. And I've written farces, which I'm terrible at. And I've written a bunch of plays I've never even done anything with. But mainly because I do a lot of directing as well. So getting time to write a play and getting the work in, it just, I don't want to waste time writing plays that aren't like really challenging for me. So I guess that's it.
Where do you come up with your ideas?
Well, I kind of like Josiah is kind of like the Odyssey, because I usually like to put a Greek myth or story in there because he travels thousands of miles. And he's always on this journey. He gets sold downriver. He escapes to Canada. And it's like the Odyssey because he spends 40 years before he gets his freedom. traveling and being a slave in bondage, and Ghost of the Tree and Pretty Pieces. Pretty Pieces is like Electra, and Ghost of the Tree is about the house of Agamemnon and Menelaus, because the sins of the parents visit the kids. So I kind of have that in the back of my mind as I'm writing as an echo. And then I write the dialogue in like people from that time, like Pretty Pieces is a modern urban drama, but Ghost of the Tree stretches back 100 years. Mm-hmm. So and both scripts are very challenging for people, but I like that kind of ring of mythology in the stories. So it's kind of like an epic show. But
you said that it's challenging for actors.
Yes.
What makes it challenging? What have you layered in to challenge them or?
Well, there's a monologue I gave Cassel, which he's taken 3 years to finally get what it means. And I'll just give you a quick rundown. It's he comes to the audience and he goes, "Who am I?" And he says, "A bright boy." He goes into that and he goes, "Who am I?" "A black man, blah, blah, blah." "Who am I?" "A piece of property, a slave." And then he talks about made by God in his image, to one day, made out of the ashes by God in his image, and then one day to return to those ashes till God calls me across the waters to be back with my mother and father and my kids and my wife. That's just a short version, but he's got to get all that in one monologue. Mm-hmm. He's got to be a boy. He's got to be a slave. He's got to be a black man. He's got to die and go to heaven. So he's kind of like 4 stages of his life he's talking about. And Cassel's done musicals, so usually it's a little cleaner, whatever you're doing, right? And so I have a lot of those. Like there's metaphor. There's there'll be like everyday things, like little comedy, little this, but sometimes there'll be like soaring philosophical bits and all that kind of stuff, which I like doing. I like those movies that have that.
You wrote a play called The Last Bullet that we produced for our 3rd year of Play Noir. Now I'm kind of curious because you say you like to kind of base these on Greek tragedies and whatnot. Did you do that with The Last Bullet?
Actually, it was based on 2 things, but one of the things it was based on was a short story I wrote, which I didn't do anything with it, but I always kind of liked it, about a guy who goes down to hell, a private detective, and he says at the beginning he has 1 bullet left, and then he explains as the story goes along, and that he's going to, kill himself. And I also wrote I was telling you before, an adult play for my class, which was about a farmer who saves up money because he wants to buy land during the Depression, and his wife steals the money and gives it to some cheap trickster, like a guy pretending he's an agent, so her daughter can go off to Hollywood, but it's just a scam. So he ends up shooting her. But I sort of put those 2 things. So I think the original short story was sort of like a Christian nightmare kind of thing. So I always liked the idea of people with no redeemable qualities. Like in the short stories and one-act plays, you can have that, the anti-heroes. So, but that was fun doing that story. And I'm glad I stumbled on your festival.
Likewise. No, it's a really strong piece. It's a really dark piece. And I think, as I told you last time, it affected people in the audience a few times that they wound up leaving after that one. It was a little too
really?
Dark. Yeah.
Cool.
It is a challenging piece. We had actually had to recast it because the original actor that we cast, just he wasn't getting it. He was really just too lighthearted for this dark youth, and it just and Rich Cassone, who stepped in, it was phenomenal. He just really took to it, and he did it in a minimal amount of time. So, but yeah, it's a great piece as well. So what's your process? You come up with your ideas, and then you take notes? Do you write out the story first? Do you have an outline, or do you just sit in front of the, let's just say, typewriter for all the time, and then just go to town? I mean, how do you approach this?
Well, I don't take notes or anything. I wish I did. Like, I'm not bragging that I don't take notes. I think I wish I was organized that way, but I never have been. So when I direct, I don't take notes. I just, whatever I remember, I'll say, oh, hey, Cassel, do this and do that. I'll say before the next rehearsal. I don't do outlines. I tried that, but then all I got was outlines, and I didn't have any inspiration to go further. I've got a few outlines. I know it's a good idea. It helped with plots and stuff like that, which I'm not exactly very good at, but it doesn't work for me. I think you should write with outlines. Just because I don't doesn't mean you shouldn't.
So what does work for you?
Just vomiting stuff up on the page. I usually have ideas. Like, there are certain characters I go to a lot, and I like to write about them. I've just finishing up a novel, which is probably a bit like The Last Bullet, because it's very dark and it's all about hell and all that kind of stuff in the city. And are people going crazy, or are they, or are there really demons, kind of thing? Because I like exploring mental illness and what that means in Christianity and stuff like that. So, but I do have characters that I like. I have characters from mythology I like. So there are things that I've always liked. So I just tend to write about those people. And the thing about Josiah that struck me is he was so heroic, despite all the crap that happened to him. And he did not break. He did not become violent. He did not. And that's a hard thing. Like, when you're in this, shitty situation, how do you rise above it? How does Gandhi rise above it? How does Martin Luther King rise above it? Nelson Mandela? Like, those are things that I think are just, wow, like, those are amazing. And so our goal was to find some flaws in his character, because he's very proud and, thought he was the best and all that. So egotism and conceit and pride were all parts of his character. So I think no matter what your character is, you need flaws in it, or the audience can't relate, because they go, like, that's not even realistic. So, but I usually I have a, great wealth. I read a lot till I was about 25, and then I didn't read much because I started writing more. And so that kind of formed a lot of my background. So, and Tennessee Williams and William Shakespeare are my teachers for writing, because they're poetic, and that's the way I like to write. So
what are you looking for when you read Shakespeare and Tennessee Williams in a playwriting approach? And the reason I asked this, and so I can maybe be a little more clear. So when I first started writing, that was the one biggest piece of advice I got, was to read screenplays, and but I didn't know what I was looking for, and it wasn't until I started reading really bad stuff that made me realize what made the good stuff good. So I don't to tell people, hey, these are my teachers, or go out and read. Right. What should they be looking for? Well, in order to help them learn how to write plays?
I think like a script is the surface of the character. It's only like how people interact with each other, how they talk. In a novel, you've got the, you know, what they're thinking and all that kind of stuff. So a script is hard to start off with. It's like a drive-by character study where these words come up. And I like to, Shakespeare's cool because you can dig deeper and deeper into what the meaning is. And whenever I did Shakespeare as a director, I wanted to do it based on the text, the actual text. A lot of directors just, I got a concept, and they, you know, bulldoze through what the script would be because they want to make it fit their concept. But I think actually knowing what the script means is a thing I look to as a playwright. And Shakespeare has these little moments, like Buckingham's going to be killed because Richard thinks he's betrayed him. And he says, "Could you undo my button?" Like, that's just a small line, but it adds to the character. So he can have these big soaring things and then these little tiny localized moments, which I get a real thrill out of. And for Tennessee Williams, the dialogue is brilliant, and I just love it. And I learned because how did they describe that scene? How did this come across? And I'll go, okay, hey, that's cool. And then I'll steal some of the ideas and I'll put it on my own stuff. Because
do you have an example?
Just trying to think. I will requote Hamlet over and over again, but paraphrase it. So, or Midsummer Night's Dream, or things like that. Like, I'll just grab, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. I stuck that in my horror novel. So I will use like pluck lines from things, but I'll usually reword it. And there are plays that I really like the storyline. I'm not big on philosophical plays. I don't like George Bernard Shaw. It's a bunch of talking heads. My parents loved him, did him all the time. But I liked the emotional ones. Like, I'm very big on emotion, so I love that kind of stuff, like poignancy. And Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet are great because they have like sad, and like Romeo and Juliet is tragic, but it's also very funny. Midsummer Night's Dream is hilarious. I've done those shows a couple of times each. Making the audience feel is my big goal. Whether they feel like, oh my God, I'm going to slit my wrist, or
how do you achieve that? Not getting your audience to slit their wrist, but how do you achieve making them feel? What are the tricks that you do?
Tragedy is simple. Making people feel stuff is to go against the emotion of what's going on. So making it simple, because drama is cathartic. So when Hamlet says he's ready to give in to whatever fate, he was fighting against fate, and then he just gives into it, and that's a catharsis for the audience, because then he goes to his tragic end, but it's also the plot has set it up that way. So
how do you do it when you write? If you intent on making your audience feel something with your writing, how do you do that?
Well, I will usually, I think being lyrical helps, like being poetic helps a lot, but also metaphor really works. So if you're talking about something, but you're not exactly addressing the situation, then that can make people feel, the whole play has to set up the sadness of the thing, and the sadness has to be spare. Because if you write too much, it becomes melodrama. Yeah. So you have to be like, keep it as brief as possible, and then people will feel stuff. they don't feel stuff if you're going on and on and on about it.
Don't hammer it home.
Yes. And so I think as writers, you want to exult in the moment, right? Because how can I say this? How can I say this? So I love these words to describe the situation, but then what happens is I think you've got to cut it down to the bare minimum, and then it becomes powerful. My actress for Ghost of the Tree was a great tragic actress, but she didn't know comedy at all. She had no comic timing. So I'd say this line and go 1, 2, 3, punchline. And I tell her to count, and she would do that, and she got a lot of laughs, but because it's always that way. Comedy's timing, so is drama. But
what makes brilliant dialogue?
In my opinion, never. I think one of the important things is don't get to the point. A lot of times, because people are always skirting around the issues. And if you, like, an audience will know that they're kind of avoiding it. I think dialogue has to, like, the one thing is the energy has to be up till the next line. As an actor, you know that. So you have to go the upward inflection. You have to have the right word at the end of a line. The second person picks it up, the energy up, and then it's bang, 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 bang. But if you don't have that in the writing, where would the actor can end up on a high as he's passing the line to the next actor, then that actor just has to, surf on the line that he got before. Mm-hmm. But if it goes down, he's got to pick up the energy, and then you get that kind of like wave kind of thing, which the actor builds it up and then he's running out of air and it goes down, and then because you want things to build up like steps, and so the exciting climax of the dialogue. How
do you achieve that?
Actually, my parents, who did a lot of acting, taught me about don't put useless words on the end of a line.
Can you give me an example of
what
those would be?
Okay, so you might say, I'm going to kill you if I get around to it. Or you can say, well, you could say, if I get around to it, I'm going to kill you, is even more powerful than I'm going to kill you if I get around to it.
Right.
Don't apologize for your lines. It's got to be like bang, bang, bang. And I've listened to a lot of people. I walk up and down the street. I love listening to street people because they have natural poetry. And people save the important line for the end of a sentence. Like whatever's the most important thing comes at the end of the sentence. I don't know how the human brain works that way. But as writers, writing prosaically, we're not used to that. Where like the important word might be in the middle of a sentence, but it's got to be the last line, so then it's easy to set up the next line. Like you might say, stuff like "watch out." That's punchy. That's whatever.
Right.
What do you mean? Look over there, quick. Run or something. I don't know, but it's got to be emotional and powerful. And you can have like dialogue that just wanders around because the character's like that. Like if you have a shy character who's.
How do you make dialogue emotional?
You have to set it up. And like, for instance, and I watch a lot, I've read a lot of plays and seen a lot of plays, but in Pretty Pieces, the opening is the girl's looking at her picture book of when she was young, and she's forgotten all the trauma that happened to her, but she finds this book, the scrapbook of when she was young, and had a report card, and she starts saying, "Oh, look at this." She's got a baby doll that she thinks is real because she's losing it a little. And she's showing the baby all the things that happened to her when she was younger. And that's the way it opens. And that's the way it closes. So it's very simple. But because the whole thing ties into that, about innocence and whatever, she ends up killing her brother, but in an innocent way. And she starts remembering when she was in a play in school when she was 6 and the lights went out, and then the lights go out. So it's very simple and pathetic because she's childlike, and then it goes through, and there's a whole bunch of stuff happens, but then it goes back to the, like, that worked for me anyways. I mean, I think trying to be emotional is not worrying about the lines you're saying at the time, but how you set it up, how it contrasts with what went before, like comedy, because you can set up a punchline. That.
Do you think well, since you brought up comedy, we know that there's a rules, the rules of 3 in comedy.
Yeah.
Do you think there's rules in dialogue, or are there any other?
Yes. I think some of the rules in dialogue are your character has to say those lines that they would say. They can't just reach out for some word that they haven't used at all during the play. Like, you have to have, and if you do use a word that is unusual, you have to kind of frame it as if that character knows it's like, that evidence was indecipherable, something like that. Little pause and then say it. There's a rule of 3 for dialogue because you want people to remember the important things. So I watch a lot of Netflix, and if they don't say it 3 times, I don't remember what happened. So, like, they set it up. I find in plays especially, because you can't rewind, you can't do anything. So if there's an important plot point, say it 3 times in your dialogue. Doesn't matter who says it. Doesn't matter if 3 different people say it. 2 doesn't work. We've in Josiah, we are always making it 3s because that just works. Not 2. 1 can be okay, but 2 is stuck up in the middle and it doesn't quite ring enough. So I would, dialogue has to flow. It has to flow in the actor's mouth. It has to flow from the pen. And a lot of that is, well, I don't like, what's his name? Marilyn Monroe's husband did The Crucible and Death of a Salesman.
Arthur Miller.
Oh yeah. I don't like his writing because his writing is self-consciously trying to do those things. And we've done a couple of his plays. I did The Crucible. But when I compare Tennessee Williams to Arthur Miller, I think Tennessee Williams stuff flows. I'm like, if people like Arthur Miller, that's great. Everybody has their own opinion. But for me as a writer, that's not kind of the way I want to go. So
when you were with Bottle Tree, did you take submissions? Did you?
Yep.
And were there things that you noticed that playwrights, were there errors that were common that came across that you can advise playwrights to avoid doing? Like what are some things you would advise playwrights to avoid?
We got submissions and we did a 1-act play competition, but one of the main things for a 1-act play is don't make a clunky set. And I would say that in my, précis for the competition. And then I get a lot of plays with complicated sets. There was one set where it was in a convenience store with all the stuff in a convenience store, which would have taken a week probably to put up.
Sure.
That doesn't work. There's a lot of people that I would judge it on whether it could be put into a play, like whether this play would actually work for my expertise. So if there's, you can't have a magic character that turns into a cartoon and back to reality, like things like that. People think they're writing a movie. You can't write a TV script either for a play, because those are just like scene.
Right.
And the other thing that people tend to do is they have no depth in the dialogue. So the writing is exactly what it's on the paper. There's nothing deeper. There's no hint at subtext. There's no character. Anybody could say the lines. And that's another thing, I think, that if you're a writer and you want to write, you've got all this stuff stored up inside your heart, inside your head, that you can, because people want to write to be famous, right? But I mean, I think you've got to feel some cool stuff inside you. So when you write it, it's not just, oh, that's a play. Okay. Well, so what's cool about it? And there was like American plays were the best. Canadian plays never have plots. So you never know what's going on. They're very artsy, but American plays tell good stories. So I enjoy them as I'm reading them, and they have echoes of other things. Usually they're well read, and so that they can write stuff, but it means a whole bunch of other things too. Like I can't explain it. I just go, wow, that's cool. That's
right. And on that note, not being able to explain it, I think we all know what subtext is. And I'd like to think that I can achieve it when I write. I don't know if I do. And I don't know, how do you achieve subtext? How do you? Is there
it's usually
formula?
No, I think dialogue is one thing that is sort of running away from the character. So there's dialogue can be done to lie. Dialogue can be done to confront. Dialogue can be done because you're having a breakdown. And then people react in different situations in different ways. So the same person might react differently than another person to a situation. And it's like giving little bits, little hints of the character, but not too much. And then have the writing for each character unique too. So then, this character is different than this character. If they're having a conversation, one might be hiding something from the other character. And you might get that by the character not talking about the thing at all, like wanting to talk about anything else but what character A wants to know. So you get an idea, well, they're evasive, right? So things like that. Why are they evasive? Blanche's whole thing in Streetcar comes out eventually because she's acting very flighty, that her boyfriend killed himself. So that comes up later. You don't know what the subtext is, but there's something underneath how Blanche is acting. So I think, but it's hard. I mean, it's like muscle memory. So when you're writing a lot, you have to write a lot. You absolutely have to write a lot. So, because then it becomes muscle memory. So I'd be a terrible writing coach because I just, like, a lot of times I don't even know how it works. I just know, like, I've rewritten so much stuff. I just, like, my mind just goes, oh, that sounds bad.
Well, yeah. And that was what I was going to say. Is it a matter of knowing what works, or is it a matter of knowing what doesn't?
What doesn't?
I think that's kind of a good way to approach it as well.
And you can only do it by doing it. Like, you have to write a lot. You might see a show, like there's a writer in George Walker in Canada who went to see a play, and he was a cab driver, and he said, well, I can write better than that. Oh, wow. And then he became a famous writer in Canada. So he could take the bus and everybody would know who it was. But but I think that can inspire people too. Like, oh, I can do better than that.
Sure.
Or that's awesome. I want to write like that person.
Well, here we had the abomination of Wonder Woman 1984. I don't know if you caught it up there, but after I left that movie, I had to post that all my struggling playwright and screenwriter friends don't give up because that abomination was made.
Who was in that?
Oh, Gal Gadot,
Oh yeah,
Chris Pine, I think, Kristen. Oh, it's just terrible, just terrible. So let's go back a little bit because we brought up not using outlines. Does that mean you write linearly? Do you write how the story is going to go, or do you like? I have an idea. I know this scene. I'm going to write this scene and I'll connect it with this scene somehow later. Or do you always like, here's scene one, scene one's done. Okay. This is scene two. And
I usually do that.
Okay.
I think what you're saying later on, I'll do that. Like about like writing something out of context. I'll just think and be writing with something and I'll go, oh, that would fit in there. Yeah, the worst thing is cutting stuff.
Sure. I'm going to apologize because apparently my gardeners decided to show up. So I don't know if we're going to get any of that background noise coming in through this episode. That's cool. But forgive me.
Better than last time.
Exactly. If it's not one thing, it's another. Do you write every day? How do you achieve when you say you have to write a lot?
Yeah.
How do you force yourself, for lack of a better word, to write?
Yeah.
How do you motivate yourself?
I used to think of it that way, but I don't think of it that way anymore. I've got a bunch of projects on the go, so I can switch from one thing to another. I find that I used to think, oh, I'm not using my time wisely. I got to write. I try to write 4:00 in the morning till 7, something like that, or whatever time. That never happens. So I just try to write. I don't do outlines. I should, and I don't have a proper schedule, which I should.
Well, sure. I guess that,
it would be easier.
Great thing. Sure, of course. I guess it's like knowing what works and knowing what doesn't, and you know that doesn't work for you. Yeah. We talked a little bit about getting your plays out, and you touched base last time about how you market your plays.
Yep.
And that was through your monologues. Can you expand on that a little bit? Can you talk about that some more?
So on the Bottle Tree website, I took monologues from my plays and put them on the website for free. And then young people primarily would take those monologues and then audition for theater schools and whatever. And then they would also, sometimes they'd have to buy the play because they would need to have that backup to explain the play. And also people that did the play, I got a lot of, especially about Pretty Pieces, people emailing me and said, that's brilliant. I got to do it, but I don't have much money. So I'd say, okay, I'll give you a deal. Because I don't mind doing that with young people when they're starting out, because there is usually a financial burden for them. So we'd get people would take those monologues and do YouTube videos too of those monologues. And so gradually it just kind of circles and, but I put my plays up on Amazon as well, because I like self-publishing, because you get a higher royalty rate, but you do have to get your plays out there and people have to see them. In New York, there's a university, but I can't remember its name, but they're doing Ghost of the Tree right now. And when I go down to New York, I'll send them a note and say, well, I got this other play. But I think you have to be a self-promoter, because if you're not a self-promoter as a writer, you'll end up having to be one anyways, because they'll send you on a publicity trip where they'll say, what they tend to say is, you need social media. You got to be telling all your friends. You got to be doing this. You got to be doing that. So you have to do it anyways.
Sure.
But you don't only get a 10% royalty from a publisher. So you get about a 45-50% from Amazon. So it's more money. So
do you determine your own rates as far as royalty goes?
Not royalties, but the price of the play. So, you kind of look at what other plays are going for. And there's also ebook plays. And they also have a thing where you can, it's a page reading thing. So however many pages somebody reads for free, you get a certain percentage of that. So if you put your book, somebody can get it from the library from Amazon, and then you get a certain bit from that. And there's Goodreads, which if you have a presence on that, it's harder for plays, but still, if you're on there, then you can kind of talk up your stuff. LinkedIn, Facebook Business, you can sell your plays on Facebook. You can find a place and do a play selling thing, where you autograph. I mean, there's a lot of regular stuff you can do.
Since you do
testimonials.
Okay. Since you do self-publishing, how do you approach formatting when it comes to that? I mean, if you look, there's so many different ways. There's the Dramatist Play Service, they have their way, and then the Sam French kind of has their way as well. And then any anthology you buy, it's just different. How did you decide on yours, and what advice do you give for?
Well, there's a certain.
If you're using a final draft or anything like that, it's a totally different format. Then it becomes publishing wise. So for anybody who's trying to self-publish, how do you approach formatting?
Well, Amazon has some templates for publishing, and there's also certain Times New Roman is not a big thing anymore for doing plays. There's things like Garamond, which is more popular. I usually read blogs from other writers. I learn a lot from other writers. So they'll say, well, this is the format you should be using. For plays, I can't remember what I'm doing right now. I always do it the same way, but I just can't remember what it is for the name, the character name, and then the dialogue. But I always italicize any stage directions or set directions or things like that. So, but you can find that easily enough by going online, and I'm sure old plays are not formatted the same way as plays are now. So look at your favorite writer. I'll do that. Amazon also has the first few pages of the play. So you can easily look at a writer you like and say, oh, okay, I'll do that way.
Yeah. I did all 7 seasons of Play Noir individually, and then I did the compilation. So it was a lot of learning from that, a lot of hit and miss. And I had done,
gotta be patient.
Yeah. So it was I think all characters' names were capitalized. It was always bold, followed by a colon, and then parentheticals were that was So, and sometimes even with where certain actions came in, and whether or not it was in a separate paragraph. So
yes,
if you had any advice in that regard, because that's formatting we haven't really talked about, because we haven't really gotten into self-publishing yet in any of these interviews. So that's really wonderful. Any other advice that you've gotten in that regard as far as taking the self-publishing route?
I think you got to be able. Writers tend to be introverted, so that's always the big wall to get over if you're self-publishing, because you've got to feel enough about yourself when you self-publish. It can't just be a vanity project. It has to have something worthwhile for other people. One thing I go to Amazon is because you can spend $5,000 to $10,000 self-publishing. There are lots of organizations that'll take your money out there.
Oh yeah.
So that's a big thing why I went with Amazon, because I always see those ads and I look at them and I know they're like scam jobs, but
well, they're doing the exact same thing you would be doing. They're going to probably using Amazon themselves.
Yep.
And then just doing the work for you. So,
Yes, that's true.
So yeah. I wouldn't spend the money to have somebody self-publish for you. Definitely not.
And the other thing about Amazon is they print on demand. So in the old days, you'd have to have 1,000 plays printed if you were self-publishing, and maybe you sold 12 and you're stuck with 988 plays. So this way with Amazon, it's print on demand. So there's no like inventory issues that come up. So that's again why I like it. But people prey on actors, writers, everybody who wants to get ahead, and, they'll take your money. So you have to be very careful about that kind of thing. So making a movie, there's tons of people that if you try to get something on Apple, there's aggregators which will take your movie and charge you $1,500 to put it on Apple, when theoretically you can put it on there for free. So there's a lot of stuff that screws over artists, and so I would say do everything as cheaply as possible for the biggest reward. You can't just spend money and expect to make it.
Right.
You have to work hard.
Is there any other advice you have just in general for playwrights as it is?
No matter what anybody says, if you really believe it in yourself as a writer, or you really need to write, don't let other people tell you can't do it, which I tell the kids during the school tour. But I think I was telling you last time, there was my English teacher at Trent University. My English prof said, "Well, I hope you don't want to be a writer." I mean, I was kind of used to that kind of thing, like that backlash, because people are always trying to say you can't do something all the time. If they don't say it, you're not doing what you should be doing.
Well, I think that's where I think that, and I don't know if we touched on this last time, I think that's where the importance of self-producing comes from.
Yeah.
Because it's like in certain art forms or certain businesses or careers, we have this tendency to wait for somebody else to give us permission to do what we want to do.
Wait by the phone.
Yeah. Movie making is a little bit different. I mean, you can kind of get away with it cheaply now with cell phones and whatnot. You have halfway decent sound. But I think when it comes to plays, whether you're a playwright or even an actor, it's like, I would say, if there's roles that you want to perform in, don't wait for somebody else to give you permission and cast you in it. If you really want to play that role, go purchase the royalty, purchase the rights for that play, and go stage it yourself.
Absolutely.
I don't think people really realize how accessible it is. I didn't really realize it. You could probably get a halfway decent space for maybe a few $100 a weekend. And, if you really want to play that role, pay the $1,000 and whatever it's going to be for royalties, get some friends together and stage it.
Well, that's what agents like to see.
Sure.
If they don't sign you up and you apply next year or whatever, they want to know that you've been doing something, because they want self-starters. They don't want people that are, passive, because they want people to be out doing stuff and they, helping themselves. What was I going to say? But, oh, yes, I know what I was going to say. I think it's really important what I'm doing, because it's so cheap to do. So you can do a play like what I'm doing with no props. You could play it in somebody's living room. You can just find a benefactor who wants to give you $500 to do a private showing and then do it there. So I'm trying to do a kind of theater that's minimal and cheap and has no barriers price-wise to getting it out there. So if you self-publish, if you do a play that's easy to do, don't make it like hunkered down with these huge sets, 1,000 actors. Just make it simple and just write good. And so self-publish and do a cheap show. I think that's because a cheap show you can enter in fringes and festivals. LA has quite a bit of stuff. New York has quite a bit, and they're always looking for stuff. So that's what I would do. Play Noir.
Yeah, well, we'll hopefully get Play Noir back up and running pretty soon. Hopefully, now that things have started to open a little bit.
Yeah.
Were there any other things that you noticed that when you were getting submissions that you wish that playwrights would avoid or not do?
Well, sometimes I'd see a really good play, and I knew it was a good play because I'd say, oh, if only they did this at the end, that would have been great, instead of making this choice. Mm-hmm. But you have to, I think a lot of people submit plays and never had them performed, right? So that's kind of a tell. Like when you see a play that you can tell the dialogue's really good, you know it's been tested because the playwright's gone, oh my God, and then changed it so it's good. So I think.
You think that's necessary before you to know that
I would think so.
To know that your play is done, at least have a staged reading?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that's really important. And I think actually getting them to move, your performers to move around, because you get a better sense of how lines are if they're moving around than if they're sitting down.
Sure.
Because I think that's like something you were saying about auditioning, and you could throw away the best audition, like the best part could be like reading at a table or something, or an audition, and then you've got to get it back. And I see that happen so many times. So playwrights, the same thing. People might think, if people are sitting around reading, oh, that's great. But then when you get it up in its feet, it may not quite work the same way. Yeah. And you have to change things and listen to actually how the line sounds. So.
Sure. Rejection. Did you, how did you approach rejection? Did you write rejection letters to everybody for when they were doing?
I was going to talk about my rejection.
Well, I want to hear yours as well, but I want to know if you sent rejections out and if you got responses back.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about your rejections and how you deal with it.
I'll just tell you right now how I dealt with them is just staple them on my wall. That's how I did it. But because you could cover the whole wall, You don't need wallpaper or anything. No, so it depends on the person. There's a kind of writer who's really egotistical but has no reason to be. So those are hard rejection letters to write. I don't know if you know what I mean, but I
think we talked about it last time. There's a sense of entitlement, or, just because they think they wrote it, it's and they finished, and then they're, well, I'm good. I'm a playwright. I finished a play. It deserves to be staged.
Yeah. So I'd write, like some people, I wrote a rejection letter and they'd say, and I usually say why, and if they were good writers or actually interested, they get back to me and say, so what should I do? And I'd go, well, if they're taking the time to get back to me, I'm certainly generous with my time. And so I would have a dialogue with certain writers, and certainly the best writers I'd get dialogue with. And I'd, talk to them frequently. They'd be saying, oh, my play is performing here and stuff like that. The other ones that didn't want to hear anything negative would never get back to me.
Right.
So there's the kind of writer who wants to get better. And the thing about me running a company and accepting unsolicited scripts, or a one act, like the one act competition, is I have a bias, and everybody does. So I would also say I do have a bias about certain things. I like certain kinds of writing, other things I don't like. And when you're submitting anything to anywhere, you have to realize that there's no all-seeing, all-knowing judge. They're all people, and they have their own, like, I see something on Netflix I hate, somebody else loves it. And then, the opposite. It should be that way, because you can't be all things to all people. So when you know that everybody is human, you can send the same play to 5 different people. You could win first prize in this competition and nothing in another, because I kind of liked plays that took chances too, but within the realm of being stageable. So that is a big thing too. Like, I like ambitious writers.
Do you think outside of clunky sets, what was the term you just used? Outside of clunky sets, are there any other things that make a play unstageable?
Well, yes. I think if it's nasty or misogynist, or because I would get those, racist, not funny when it's supposed to be a comedy, like, those are, like, sometimes they're cringe-inducing things. A one-man show, I'm just going to throw this out there, a lot of them are done where they go for costume changes to change character. Mm-hmm. That should never happen. It can happen in a movie or on TV, but if you got to wait 2 minutes for your guy to go off stage or girl and get changed. So I think you need a uniform set, uniform costume. And if you're in a big play, you can change costumes, but not if you're doing like a one-person show.
Well, can you achieve that through accessories?
Yep.
A baseball cap, a scarf,
yep.
A handbag, something to that extent.
Exactly.
Yep. But not a full-fledged.
Yep. I think that's a great idea to do. Yes. And you can style it, like maybe having one color for everything, or, but it has to be built into the theatricality of the play. It can't just, like in Ghost of the Tree, I had accessories, but there was a ethereal spirit, feminine spirit, who would change the lead character with an accessory. And she'd go in, the lead actress would go into neutral, sit down. She was an actress then. And the ephemeral character would change her accessory and she would go back on stage. And as long as you have rules that you follow through the whole play, I think that's one thing. Like, if you set something up, don't change it later. Like, if you have a costume change, do it a certain way. Don't suddenly go to another way of doing it. Set yourself rules and the audience won't think about it. But if you don't follow your own rules, then an audience will be, taken out of the play. So whatever you set up, follow them. That's a big thing, I think.
Is there anything that you wish you'd known as a playwright when you first started out? That
I wasn't going to make any money.
Fair enough.
I'm just being funny.
Sure.
I did learn that it's easier to make money as a playwright if you're producing your own stuff. So that's one thing I've learned. You can make a living doing that. So that's why I think it's important to get involved in theater, learn everything, and then they could be your other theater jobs while you're really trying to do your playwriting. So I think that's important. I don't write that many plays. because I'm doing so much directing and so much else in theater.
Mm-hmm.
But I write all the time, and
Since you've done so many different jobs in the theater, do you think that there's one of those that you would recommend playwrights directing? Now, how do you feel about? We already know how we feel about producing our own work. What are your thoughts of directing your own work?
I wouldn't have thought it was a good idea earlier, but I do now, because directing is an extension of writing. So it's so you can tweak things as a director. You can tweak scripts.
Your own, no, correct? I don't know if we'd recommend that you tweak anybody else's or
no, that's true. But if you're doing your own, I mean.
Sure. Okay.
But I think directing is a really good tool for a writer to be able to do.
Now, do you recommend just even when they're just starting out directing their own work, or
no?
You wait a while to get some before you start directing your own work? Okay. Because I wasn't sure if that. I know you said you didn't at first, but I wasn't sure if you would still recommend that to people who were just starting out. So,
no.
Any other roles, quote unquote, that you would recommend that playwrights? Maybe
lighting design would be good.
How was that? How does that help with playwriting?
Because it gives you another framework. Like, you can be writing a script and think of what the lighting should be like. So I think that's important too.
Okay. All right. How do you approach your stage directions, your action? Do you take the Shakespearean approach and have very little, or?
Usually, yes.
Okay. So only if it's an important thing. Because I find that sometimes new playwrights, they're like, and I find this particularly with young playwrights, they'll do things like exactly like that. Charles wipes his face. I'm like,
yes.
we don't need to do that, or takes a drink.
Yes.
Well, I guess the only play that you can really justify that in is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because that's what that whole play is about, taking a drink.
And I think you were talking about earlier that stage managers will often write the directions of a.
I guess that's, I think that's the misleading thing, because I didn't realize this. I just learned, that was something that I learned, I think, in this third episode of Playwright Spotlight. I had interviewed somebody, and he was the one who informed me that all the plays up to 1980 something or something like that, all the plays that had been published were plays that where the stage managers had taken notes.
Right.
And that's what got put in the publication.
Right.
Where that's not what the playwright had done. I think Tennessee Williams is probably different in that regard, because if you look at his opening stage directions, it's very I don't know if detailed. It's very poetic in that. I think it was, I got in trouble because I had one instructor in theater in college who said, some plays aren't meant to be, they're meant to be read, not staged. And because if you look at that, I think it was a Tennessee Williams play. It was like the moonlight broke through the window and shattered into a million pieces.
Yeah.
And it was just like, you can't really stage that. I don't, I think maybe you can, I don't know.
But you get the emotional feeling of
exactly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have a playwright in your life who you think would enjoy these videos, please share it with them. And if you have a comment, question, or suggestion, or request for a playwright you'd like to see in future episodes, please leave a comment down below. And be sure to tune in every other Tuesday for new episodes, or check out some of our older episodes for more playwriting tips. And until then, and in the meantime, keep writing.